Have you heard of a famous author named Agatha Christie? Well, she is famous for writing lots of mystery novels and thrill stories, and also crime ones. Let's go through the biography of Agatha Christie and see how she became a famous writer. Little People, Big Dreams, Agatha Christie. Written by Maria Isabel Sanchez Vergara, illustrated by Elisa Muzo. Little People, Big Dreams, Agatha Christie. Written by Maria Isabel Sanchez Vergara, illustrated by Elisa Muzo. Translated by Raquel Plicht. Little Agatha and her mum read a book together every afternoon. Agatha always had a better idea for how the story should end. In bed, Agatha went on reading until she fell asleep. Detective novels were her favorite. But then a war started, and young Agatha had to put her books aside. It was time for her to help wounded soldiers in a hospital. But Agatha's imagination wouldn't stay quiet. As a nurse, she learned about poisons and toxic potions, which could cause someone to meet a sticky end. After the war, Agatha used what she had learned to write her own stories. They always started with a mysterious murder. Who could solve such terrible crimes? Agatha invented Hercule Poirot, a detective able to decipher any dastardly deed. That is him, Hercule Poirot. Carrying her typewriter, Agatha traveled the world. People read with wonder as Poirot solved crime after crime. Agatha reached the Middle East, where she was inspired to write a mystery that Poirot couldn't crack. So she invented Miss Marple to take the case. She looked more like a granny than a detective, but Agatha knew that appearances could be deceiving. And soon everyone loved Miss Marple as much as Poirot. They read Agatha's adventures before going to bed. And gulped and gasped at them in the theatre. Agatha wrote more than 100 books and invented enough victims to fill a cemetery, but she was always pondering her next mystery. Luckily, Agatha knew that any mystery can be solved if you use your imagination. Let's go through the history line of Agatha Christie. She was born in 1890 and she died in 1976. This is a picture of young Agatha in 1900s. Then coming forward, this is another picture of her in 1926. As you can see here, this is a picture of her writing at 1946. And lastly, another picture of Agatha, 1967. Agatha Christie was born Agatha Marie Creasy Miller in 1890 in Devon, England. During the war, Agatha worked as a nurse and also dispensed medicines at the hospital. Her new expertise in poisons was put to good use when she began writing her own detective stories. In 1919, a publisher accepted the mysterious affair at Styles for publication, which was the first novel to feature the famous detective Hercule Poirot, a keen traveler. In 1922, she journeyed across the British Empire, and in 1928, she was inspired by her journey on the Orient Express to write one of her most famous novels, Murder on the Orient Express. Then in 1925, Agatha inspired her own mystery, When She Disappeared, leading to a nationwide hunt. She was eventually found safe and sound in a hotel. As time went on, Agatha continued to write, inventing her other beloved investigator, the elderly Miss Marple. Agatha Christie became the best-selling novelist of all time. Her books had been translated into more than 100 languages, and her novel, And Then There Were None, is one of the 10 most read books in history. With her peculiar characters, her enigmatic cases, and her stories full of twists and turns, she challenged the minds of millions of readers, becoming the Queen of Mystery. Hello everyone, welcome to the Storyteller Fox. Be it for bedtime or simply just to listen to audio picture storybooks, welcome here at the Storyteller Fox. In my hands, I have a book of a little girl called Anne Frank. She is famous for her diary, it's a book by Little People, Big Dreams, written by Maria Isabel Sanchez Vergara, illustrated by Sveta Dorosheva. Let's see how her journey is that she wrote and her diary became famous. See what it's all about. Little People, Big Dreams, Anne Frank, written by Maria Isabel Sanchez Vergara, illustrated by Sveta Dorosheva. Anne was a little Jewish girl who was born in Germany. She lived happily with her parents and her older sister, Margaret. in the city of Frankfurt. But when she was 4, an ugly man with a little black mustache became the leader of her country. His name was Hitler. He hated the Jews and wanted them to disappear. Anne's family moved away to Holland, which was a free country. Anne's father opened a business, and they had a home where they felt safe. But one day, the Nazis invaded half of Europe and arrived in Holland. Anne and all the other Jewish children were forced to go to separate schools and wear a star on their chest. For her 13th birthday, Anne's parents gave her a diary. That day, she discovered the pleasure of writing on her own. Anne wrote in her diary about how her family lived in fear of being arrested. They decided to leave their home and move to a secret annex behind a bookshelf at the building where her father worked. They had to share their tiny new home with another Jewish family and stay very quiet. They could not leave their hiding place in case anyone found them. Anne's diary kept her company, and she wrote in it for hours. She wanted to publish a book and became a famous writer. But one day, Anne stopped writing. The Nazi soldiers had found them and they were all arrested. Anne's diary was left behind in her room. The family were pushed onto a train full of people on its way to a concentration camp. It took 3 long days for them to arrive at the worst place on earth. Anne's father, Otto, was the only member of the family to survive the terrible war. He found her diary and wept as he read what his young daughter had written. He decided to publish a diary and share Anne's story just as he would have wanted the world had to know the true story. Since then, millions of people have read and cried with the diary of Anne Frank, the story of the little girl who dreamt of a better world. and this is the biography of Anne Frank. She was born in 1929 and she died in 1945. This is a small picture of her in 1931, and as she grew up, another picture of her at 1935. This is Anne in 1941, and another picture of Anne Frank in 1942. Anneliese Frank was born in Germany to a happy family, but when she was 4, a cruel government called the Nazi Party came into power. It was led by a man named Adolf Hitler, a dictator who forced Germans to follow his unjust rule. The Nazis hated many races, especially Jews, and brought in discriminatory rules against them. Anne's family had to move to Holland in order to be safe. But in 1939, the Nazi Party started World War II and began invading other countries, including Holland. In 1942, things got worse, and the Frank family had to go into hiding. They hid in a secret annex, tucked behind a bookshelf at Otto Frank's work. They hoped they wouldn't be arrested. Here, Anne kept a diary. She wanted to tell her story of the war and for people to read it. In 1944, German police broke into the annex and arrested Anne's family. They were all sent to concentration camps. Concentration camps were prisons where many Jews were forced to work. There was little food, lots of people, and disease spread quickly. Most people did not survive. Anne died at the Bergen-Belsen camp in 1945. Weeks before, it was freed by Allied forces. After the war, Otto found her diary and published her story, as she would have wanted. Anne became one of the most loved diaries in the world and captured the hearts and minds of the public. She lives on through her words and in all those who read her story. This is a story of young Billie Jean King. As you can see in this front cover of the picture, that she is holding a tennis racket. So can you guess who she is? Oh yes, she is a tennis player. Let's go through her story to learn more about her. Little People, Big Dreams, Billie Jean King. Written by Maria Isabel Sanchez Vergara, illustrated by Miranda Sofronio. Little People, Big Dreams, Billie Jean King. Written by Maria Isabel Sanchez Vergara, illustrated by Miranda Sofronio. Billie Jean was a little girl born on the sunny coast of California. Her family loved all kinds of sport, and her dad always encouraged her and her brother to run after any ball. The game she liked most was baseball. She even thought of becoming a professional player. But during her first baseball game, she realized she was the only girl on the field. And there was no place for her past the kids' team. She tried many sports until she discovered tennis. It was love at first serve. Her favorite things were running and hitting a ball, and tennis had both. Best of all, girls and boys could play together. Billie Jane did lots of gardening and housework to save enough money to buy her first tennis racket. When she finally held it in her hands, she felt like a champion. She always asked her mum to drive her to a court in the city where a professional tennis player was giving free lessons. He became her first coach and she became his best pupil ever. After her first lesson, Billie Jane knew what she wanted to do in life. Tennis taught her to play by the rules, to know what it feels like to win and lose, and to be a better person. One day at a tournament, Billie Jane was pushed aside from a team picture because she was wearing shorts, not a skirt. That was the dumbest reason to not be in a picture she had ever heard. But that wasn't all. There was no sports scholarships for girls in college, and women received smaller prizes than men for winning the same tournaments. The higher Billie Jane climbed in tennis, the more she realized her biggest battle would be off the court. She founded the Women's Tennis Association with 8 other bold tennis players. They all shared a dream to achieve equal pay and opportunities for men and women in sports. In one single season, Billie Jane won 3 Grand Slams, the most important tournaments in the world. She became the first tennis player and the first woman ever to be named Sports Person of the Year. She was so famous that Bobby Riggs, a windbag tennis champion, challenged her to a match called the Battle of the Sexes. He thought it would be easy to win against a woman, but Billie Jane showed him who the real champion was. Billie Jane wanted to make tennis a team sport, not a battle. Together with her first husband Larry, and with the support of Ilana, her later partner, she helped start a new league where all kids would play together. The day the first sports scholarships was given to women, Billie Jane felt happier than she had lifting any trophy. She was not just a world tennis champion, but the little girl who dreamed of changing things, and she did. This is the biography line of Billie Jane King. She was born in 1943. This is a picture of her at 1958, and another picture of her holding a large medal at 1966. It looks like her with the group of in a team. That's 1970. And this is her with President Obama in 2009. Billie Jane Moffett was born in Long Beach, California, to a family of athletes. Surrounded by sport from a young age, she soon discovered tennis. She saved money to buy her first tennis racket. $8 later, Billie Jane was ready to play. She took 3 lessons from professional Clyde Walker and decided that one day she would be world number 1. Billie Jane won her first championship at 15 and turned professional a year later. She was half of the youngest pair to win the Wimbledon women's doubles and later won the women's singles championship, becoming a star around the world with speed, strength, and skill. Billie Jane won match after match to become world number 1 in women's tennis. But tennis was something unfair. Men would receive thousands of dollars more than women for winning the same tournaments. Along with 8 other female players, Billie Jane fought this with a stunt. They would take only $1 to play tennis. She also founded the Women's Tennis Association to make sure women athletes got a fair deal. Her victory against Bobby Riggs in the Battle of the Sexes went down in history as the match that changed tennis. During her career, Billie Jane's tennis partner, Alana Kloss, became her life partner too. Together, they promote mixed-gender team tennis. In 2009, Billie Jane was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom for standing up for gender equality. She is recognized as one of tennis's most exciting players and a champion on and off the court. Hello everyone, welcome to the Storyteller Fox. Here with me I have an inspiring book of Little People, Big Dreams. This is a story of a once little boy called Bob Dylan. It's written by Maria Isabel Sanchez Vergara, illustrated by Conrad Rosette. Let's take a look and see who Bob Dylan is. Little People, Big Dreams, Bob Dylan, written by Maria Isabel Sanchez Vergara, illustrated by Conrad Rosette. Growing up in Hibbing, America, wasn't very exciting for little Robert, the eldest son of the Zimmermans. He liked to listen to music on the radio and imagined he was somewhere else. Inspired by his rock idols, Robert taught himself the guitar, the harmonica, and a strange instrument called the auto harp, which he played to an audience that was easily pleased. Who do you think he's playing in front of? At school, Robert would rather be invisible than draw attention to himself. When he took part in a talent contest, the teacher turned his microphone off. Bob sounded like a dog whose leg was caught in barbed wire. That didn't stop him. He experimented with rock, blues, and country music. At college, he found his rhythm playing old folk songs. The simple tunes were written by ordinary people who told stories about everyday life. Robert soon started composing his own songs. He had a real talent for writing rhymes and making words fit to a beat. The songs were poetic yet powerful, and he wrote them under his new name, Bob Dylan. He has his own name for his song. 1 year later, Bob dropped out of college and moved to New York. There he was nobody, but he had his guitar, his harmonica, and another useful instrument, a hat. He was determined to use it, passing it around in bars where he played. One day, a guy from a record company came to one of his gigs. He was impressed by Bob's raw force and fresh lyrics and offered him his first music contract. Times were changing, and Bob's life was about to change too. Looks a lot older here, doesn't he? Bob's music spoke about things that mattered: civil rights, war, and religion. Without trying, he became the voice of a generation eager to change the world, putting down in words what millions of people felt. His songs became anthems, sung by the most amazing artists of all times, reaching millions of people. Many of them had not heard his voice or known his name, but Bob didn't mind. All these people. There's the Byrds, Johnny Cash, Jimi Hendrix, and Adele. Instead of giving interviews or playing at being a star, Bob preferred to keep himself. He preferred to keep to himself. For him, a perfect day was working on a poem, riding around on his motorcycle, or talking with friends. Being an artist meant being free and not caring about what others might think. Bob moved from folk to rock or pop, trying new sounds and exploring different styles, challenging himself as well as his fans. He received all the awards an artist could dream of, and he was the first musician ever to be recognized with a Nobel Prize for Literature. But in true Bob style, he didn't show up to the ceremony. That's simply just Bob, being the way he is. Today, little Bob, one of the greatest musicians and poets of all time, feels cool just being himself. He's an ordinary person who says what he thinks and does what he likes most: writing songs. Let's take a look at the history of Bob Dylan. So Bob Dylan was born in 1941. At 1961, you can see him here with the guitar, and there's also him on the second picture in 1966. And at 1975, you can see him holding the guitar again here, and this is in 2012. Born Robert Allen Zimmerman, Bob grew up with his little brother and parents, Abram and Beatrice. Bob's grandparents immigrated from Russia to the United States in 1905, and the family soon became part of a close-knit Jewish community in Hibbing, Minnesota. Bob's father, Abraham, owned an electrical appliance shop, and there Bob first listened to blues and country music stations, and later rock and roll. After several performances in the high school band, Bob went to the University of Minneapolis, where he changed his name and started to make folk music, which had more feeling than rock and roll. He soon dropped out of college and moved to New York, where he met the famous Woody Guthrie and quickly became his disciple. Befriending a community of folk musicians and supporting artists such as John Lee Hooker at shows, Bob soon became one of America's most promising young talents. Known not just for his performance, he was brilliant at writing songs that expressed what people felt and thought. He signed his first record deal at age 20 with Columbia Records and quickly became known as one of the most original and poetic voices in popular music. Bob went on to win multiple awards for his contribution to music and literature, but his greatest achievements was simply being himself. At a time of great change, Bob's music gave people a voice, and his work continues to do so for millions of listeners, young and old, today. Have you heard of a designer brand called Chanel? They sell bags and other fashion products. Well, this book tells the story of a once little girl called Coco Chanel. And she was the one that started off the Chanel brand. This book is by Little People, Big Dreams. It's written by Maria Isabel Sanchez Vergara, illustrated by Anna Alburo. Let's dive in and see how her journey is. Little People, Big Dreams, Coco Chanel. Read aloud by the storyteller Fox. This is the story of a French girl called Gabrielle, When she was little, Gabrielle lived in an orphanage. That is Gabrielle. The nuns thought Gabrielle was very strange. She was different and they didn't like it. Gabrielle was different. While the other girls played, she liked to sew with a needle and thread. That is her sewing with a needle and thread while all her other friends are playing. When Gabrielle grew up, she sewed by day and sang by night. The people watching called her Coco. When Coco finally went to bed, she dreamt in shapes and patterns. She wanted to make so many things. One day, Coco made a hat for her friend. Simple and elegant. It was different to the usual style. Wow. Isn't that beautiful? It's got a beautiful hat there. Coco made more and more hats until she had enough to open a hat shop. Her modern design surprised the mademoiselles in Paris. One evening, at a party, Coco saw that the other ladies weren't dancing. Their corsets were too high and they could hardly breathe. So Coco created a brand new style, simple and straight. Her dresses and skirts would be comfortable to wear. At her first fashion show, some people sneered. Coco's clothes were too strange and different from them. But as time went on, Coco showed them that to be stylish, you don't need to wear corsets or sparkly sequins. And being different might make other people think differently too. That's why everyone now remembers the young Gabrielle as the great designer, Coco Chanel. This is the biography of Coco Chanel. She was born in 1883 and she died in 1971. This is a picture of her at 1932. Here is another picture of Chanel at 1936. And further on, you can see a picture of Coco Chanel in 1937. Then at 1962, this is a picture of her. Coco Chanel was one of the most famous fashion designers that ever lived. She was born as Gabrielle Chanel in a charity hospital and grew up in a rundown house in a French town. Following the death of her mother, when Gabrielle was 11 years old, she was sent to a strict convent school where she learned to sew. After school, she became a seamstress, sewing for a tailor during the day, while in the evenings she sang on stage. It was at this time that she earned the nickname Coco from the soldiers in the audience. Then in 1908, she became a hat maker and soon afterwards opened her first shop in Paris. Soon she had more shops and started to sell as well clothes as well as hats. Her simple, elegant designs, which were straighter and shorter than normal, and freed women from corsets, took the world by storm. In 1918, Chanel opened a culture house in 31 Rue Cambon, and 3 years later, she unveiled her first perfume, known as Chanel No. 5. She became a worldwide fashion icon, and her comfortable, easy-to-wear styles changed women's clothes forever. And that is the story of the famous designer called Gabrielle Chanel, or as people nicknamed her, Coco Chanel, by Little People, Big Dreams. It's such a wonderful book that inspires all of us about the incredible things that these outstanding people achieve during their childhood and during their lifetime. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the story of Coco Chanel, the famous fashion designer. Do you like to dance and sing and play music? Or perhaps just like David Bowie, in his childhood, he loved to do all those things. Let's go through his story and see how he became famous. Little People, Big Dreams, David Bowie. Written by Maria Isabel Sanchez Vergara, illustrated by Anna El Hero. Little People, Big Dreams, David Bowie. Written by Maria Isabel Sanchez Vergara, illustrated by Anna El Hero. Little David lived with his family in a tiny house on an ordinary street in London, but he had ideas that would take him out of this world. At school, he loved music and dance classes. He had a real talent for singing, and his dance moves were from another planet. His teachers had never seen anything like it before. He spent hours listening to his brother's rock and jazz records. David was so inspired by the power of music that he started to write his own songs. David started art, music, and design at school. Sometimes his teachers were not sure if he was a boy or a girl, but David was just delighted to be himself. One day, he got into a silly fight with his friend George, who punched him in the eye. This punch changed David's look forever and made him strangely magnetic. David and George remained friends and formed a group called the Conrads. The rest of the band was happy playing at weddings, but David wanted to become a star. That's the Conrads. He jumped from band to band looking for a chance, dreaming that one day all the lonely kids on planet Earth would sing his songs out loud. But David knew that a great singer needed to be a great performer. He decided to mix his music with the most spectacular outfits and dance moves ever seen on stage. David wrote a song about a lonely astronaut, and it became his first big hit. The whole world listened to his song. The day man first walked on the moon. Next, David transformed into an alien rock star called Ziggy Stardust, the coolest space invader the world had ever seen. Dressed as Ziggy, he finally made it to superstardom. David wasn't sure where he was going from there, but he knew it wouldn't be boring. He kept reinventing himself, and that's what made him David Bowie. For more than 40 years, he kept exploring new galaxies filled with futuristic sounds. He inspired generations of fans to find their own voice and dare to be different. And by never being afraid to be himself, little David became the most unique star who ever fell to earth. This is the history line of David Bowie. He was born in 1947 and he died in 2016. This is a picture of him in 1960, and there's another picture of him in 1973, then that is him at 1976, and lastly, that is a picture of him at 1995. David Bowie was born as David James in Brixton, London. From an early age, he loved to express himself through music, dance, and painting. His older brother, Terry, introduced him to music records, and David was hooked. He started to learn many instruments, including the saxophone. In 1962, his friend George punched him in the eye, which left him with a permanently dilated pupil. This made his eyes look like they were different colors, as his left pupil was so big. After a 4-month stint in hospital and multiple surgeries, George and David made up and formed their first band, the Conrads. They played weddings and small events, but David wanted to be a star. He left school at 16, deciding to take his musical career to the next level. He played with many bands and changed his name to David Bowie to stand out. Bowie went solo and his career rocketed. His songs became household tunes. His first hit, Space Oddity, was played on television over the Apollo 11 moon landing. Bowie then imagined himself as a new character, Ziggy Stardust. He adopted a character with a red quiff, face paint, and wild outfits. His song, Changes, came to represent how David reinvented himself and his music. He was a style chameleon, whose songs hopped across genres and were influenced by artists. Like Andy Warhol, from pop to rock, David continued to make music until he passed away from cancer in 2016. Many people thought that his last album, Black Star, was a final, knowing gift to his fans. Over his lifetime, David made 26 albums, was entered into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and won the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award. He left the world as one of the most iconic singer-songwriters of his generation. And that was the story of David Bowie. Have you heard of a once little girl named Emmeline Pankhurst? Well, she was famous for being the person that votes for the women's rights. And she was famous for her great bravery and hard work. This is a remarkable story of her. It's by Little People Big Dreams, Emmeline Pankhurst, written by Lisbeth Kaiser, illustrated by Anna Sanfilippo. Little People Big Dreams, Emmeline Pankhurst. Emmeline was born into a big family in a nice house in Manchester, England. At the time she grew up, life was hard for many people. Her parents did whatever they could to help, and they often brought young Emmeline along. Emmeline learned to read when she was 3, and it became her favorite thing to do. She read the newspaper and book after book, drawn to stories of heroes who fought for for others. She dreamt about who she might become. But Emmeline didn't have many choices because she was a girl. One night, she heard her father say that it was too bad she wasn't a boy. She wouldn't go to university, get a job, or even vote like her brothers. Emmeline didn't understand why. She began to read about women's rights and begged her mother to bring her to a meeting so she could learn more. There, Emmeline heard that women in England, like in many other countries, were treated unfairly. They needed the right to vote in order to change things. Emmeline knew what she had to do. As soon as Emmeline finished school, she began working for women's rights. One of the leaders of the cause was a lawyer named Richard, who also believed that women should be equal to men. The two fell in love, working side by side to help women win the right to vote. Emmeline and Richard married and had a family. For many years, they tried to get voting rights for women, but nothing changed. Sadly, Richard became sick and died, leaving Emmeline with 4 children, little money, and no rights as a woman. Emmeline had to work very hard to support her family, but she didn't stop supporting women's rights. Soon it was her daughters who begged Emmeline to take them to meetings. They asked why women had been following unfair rules for so long. This gave Emmeline an idea. Emmeline and her daughters became the leaders of a new group of women, a group that would stop following the rules and would fight for their rights. People called them suffragettes. They started by speaking out on street corners and at fairs. They stood up to protest at big meetings. Some people laughed at them, but others began to listen. The government tried to stop them, so they fought harder. They marched in the streets, they broke windows, set fires, and chained themselves to railings. Even though some were hurt and others arrested, more and more women joined Emmeline's group. They were braver than anyone had imagined. In between spending many days in prison, Emmeline traveled to the US and spoke at big theatres. People gathered by the thousands to hear her. She told them she would keep fighting until every woman was free to do the same things as men. Then a great war broke out, and lots of men went off to fight. Emmeline encouraged suffragettes to take over jobs that only men had done before. They were stronger than anyone had believed. After the war, Emmeline's dream came true. Women would finally get the right to vote. By fighting for others, Emmeline had done what no one thought a little girl could do. She had become a hero. And this is the biography line of Emmeline Pankhurst. She was born in 1858 and she died in 1928. In 1875, this is a picture of her in the middle. Then in 1879, that's another picture of her. That's a picture of her in the 1900s. And in 1928. Emmeline Pankhurst was one of the world's most influential activists who helped British women win the right to vote. Born in Manchester, England, Emmeline was inspired at a young age by her parents' activism, and went to her first meeting about women's rights or suffragette with her mother at the age of 14. She soon began working for suffragette, eventually marrying one of its leaders, Richard Pankhurst. When Richard died unexpectedly, Emmeline raised their 4 children and worked, while continuing to fight for suffragette. Emmeline and her daughters started a new women's activist group that encouraged women to demand their rights with deeds, not words. Protesting in ways only men had before, they were often hurt and arrested, but they kept fighting, gaining support worldwide and changing the way people thought about women. During World War I, Emmeline's suffragette army stopped protesting and took jobs that men left behind, which helped the country and showed how capable women were. The British government gave all women the right to vote shortly after Emmeline died, and many other countries followed suit. Emmeline's heroism and leadership changed the minds of an entire nation and changed the lives of women forever. Have you ever had a dream that you wished came true? And did you know that any dreams is possible so long as you reach out for it? Well, this is an example of an inspiring story of a girl named Yvonne Goolagong, where her dreams came true. This book is by Little People, Big Dreams, written by Maria Isabel Sanchez Vergara and illustrated by Lisa Kosterk. Come and read with me and let's see how Yvonne Goolagong made her dream come true. Little People, Big Dreams, Yvonne Goolagong, written by Maria Isabel Sanchez Vergara illustrated by Lisa Kostick. Little Yvonne grew up on a hot, dusty farm in Australia. She was the third of 8 children, all of them descendants of the Wiradjuri people who had lived on the land for more than 60,000 years. Yvonne's family was very poor and couldn't afford to buy her many toys. But one day, under the wheel of her father's car, Yvonne found the most amazing treasure, an old tennis ball. She loved that tennis ball so much. Her father made her a wooden racket to hit it with. It didn't look like the real thing, but I can start with anything, Yvonne thought. One evening, she discovered a story about a young female tennis player who went to a place in England called Wimbledon and won on its magical centre court. She went to bed dreaming about the girl. That's her looking at the player that went to Wimbledon. But taking part in a world-class tennis tournament felt like a fairy tale to a little Indigenous girl. Yvonne was not allowed to join a tennis club and had to watch the games through the fence, memorizing everything the coach said. Yvonne went to the club day after day. Finally, the club's manager noticed her. He gave her the keys so that she could teach herself how to play when all the kids were gone, and she did. A tennis coach named Vic Edwards heard about a young girl who could play faster than any other new talent. He asked Yvonne to move to Sydney. There, she lived with his family and trained to become a professional player. The day she left home, her mother gave Yvonne a tennis dress made of bed sheets and some very good advice. Do not worry about winning or losing. Just play your best and have a lovely time. What a great advice. I will say bye to her. It became Yvonne's secret weapon. She didn't think winning was everything and losing was a disaster. Every time she hit the court, she enjoyed her matches and looked forward to the next point. Shot after shot, Yvonne made it into all the major tournaments, playing in Sydney, Paris, and New York. One day, she was in Wimbledon. She won the tournament and became number 1 in her world. She had to wait 9 years until she won Wimbledon again. That day, there was a very special guest watching her from the stands. Her daughter, Kelly. Yvonne became the first mother to win the tournament in more than 60 years. How amazing is that? She became the winner. She was able to win at the tournament. When she retired, Yvonne kept inspiring the next generation of Australian tennis players, helping young Indigenous children make it into the court. And this is how little Yvonne became the most graceful player the world has ever met. A living legend who breaks barriers every time she hits the ball. This is the biography of Yvonne Goolagong. So she was born in 1951. This is a picture of her in 1960. And in 1971, that's another picture of her. And in 1980, it's her. And finally in 2018. Yvonne Faye Goolagong was born on July 31st, 1951 to Wiradjuri people in Barralon. It's a small town in New South Wales, Australia. Yvonne is an Indigenous Australian, meaning that she is a descendant of Australia's first people who have lived on the land for more than 60,000 years. When Yvonne was a little girl, Indigenous Australians were treated very poorly by white people who did not recognize their heritage. They were also not allowed to enjoy many everyday things that white people did, like playing tennis. Luckily, the owner of the local club ignored this rule. And it was a good thing he did. Yvonne was faster than any other child her age, and she had an amazing ability to judge a tennis ball's speed and bounce. Yvonne's biggest dream was to play on Wimbledon's centre court. So in 1956, her dream became reality when she was spotted by professional tennis coach Vic Edwards. He had heard about Yvonne's skill and suggested she move to Sydney to train and become professional. Within months, she was junior Australian champion and aged 20. She beat fellow Australian Margaret Court in Wimbledon, becoming the #1 player in the world. Yvonne went on to win 92 tournaments, including Wimbledon and the Australian Open. Understanding that your dreams when you are little are the force that keeps you going. Yvonne now helps hundreds of young Indigenous athletes find their way on and off the tennis court. Hello everyone, welcome to the Storyteller Fox. Are we ready for some story time? Be it for bedtime or simply just to listen to audio picture books online? Welcome here at the Storyteller Fox. Have you ever heard of a little girl who was so concerned of the climate crisis that she wanted to do something about it? Well, in my hands is a book about a once little girl called Greta Thunberg. This book is by the Little People, Big Dreams series. It's written by Maria Isabel Sanchez Vergara, illustrated by Anke Weckman. Let's take a look and see who Greta Thunberg is. Little People, Big Dreams, Greta Thunberg. Written by Maria Isabel Sanchez Vergara, illustrated by Anke Weckman. Greta was a little Swedish girl who learned from her parents to turn off the lights, not to waste water, and never throw out food. 3 simple lessons for being kind to nature that most grown-ups haven't quite learned yet. She was very proud of her great-grand-uncle, Sven, a brilliant scientist who, 100 years before Greta was born, made an alarming discovery. The planet was warming up, and humans were the ones responsible for it. But even though adults have known this for a long time, not much has been done to change it. Every day, millions of tons of toxic gases are thrown into the air. Greta wondered what would be left of the planet when she grew up. At school, she watched a film about climate change. Most students were worried about polar bears losing their homes because of the North Pole melting out. Once the film was over, everyone forgot about it. Everyone except Greta. She felt so hopeless about the future that she stopped talking. Doctors said she had selective mutism and Asperger's syndrome, which meant she would only speak and pay attention to what was really important to her. Some may have thought that these were two terrible conditions, but they ended up becoming Greta's greatest powers. They helped her to stick to her promise, to do everything she could to slow down the planet's warming. Greta started by convincing her parents to give up air travel and stop eating meat, but there were dozens of other little things she could do. She knew that she couldn't stand up for something without walking the walk. She had done her homework, but it wasn't enough to stop global warming. Politicians had to do theirs too. One day, instead of going to school, Greta decided to sit quietly in front of the Swedish Parliament, holding a sign. Not very many people noticed her that first day, but it didn't bother Greta. She kept going with her strike every single Friday. And every time she got there, more and more students joined her. It was time for children to wake up the adults. Soon, all over the world, thousands of students started skipping school to protest outside of their city halls, fighting for the future of the next generation. Inspired by Greta's story, millions of people from Melbourne to San Francisco flooded the streets in the first world strike against global warming. It was the biggest environmental protest ever. She crossed the ocean on a wind and solar-powered boat to speak in front of world leaders. In the name of all children, Greta asked people in power to stop making up excuses and start acting before it's too late. What started with just one girl with a handmade sign became a movement that includes us all. Because global warming is the greatest challenge humanity will ever face. But little Greta is no longer alone. This is a biography of Greta Thunberg. She was born in 2003. This is her in 2018. And this is Greta in 2019. And this is the protest 2020. And this is Greta Thunberg at 2020. Greta Thunberg was born in Stockholm, Sweden in 2003. When she was 8 years old, she learned that human activity was causing the Earth to become hotter and hotter, causing a climate crisis. This could result in animal and plant species going extinct, as well as more natural disasters like floods and hurricanes. Greta could not understand why more people did not take climate change seriously. No one in power was doing much to solve this problem. This made Greta depressed, but she did what she could to make a difference. She stopped using airplanes to travel and became vegan. But she knew she would have to do more to make people realize the danger of climate change. When she was 15, she began missing school to protest outside the Swedish parliament. Other children soon joined her. Schools strike for climate, first in Sweden, then across the world. This forced governments to take notice of her cause. Greta was invited to speak to world leaders and activists. She became known for telling the truth when no one else would. When she was just 16, Greta told leaders of the United Nations that they were destroying her generation's future by ignoring climate change. Millions of people around the world were inspired by Greta to take action wherever they could. Some powerful people have said that she is too young to be worth listening to. But Greta knows better. She called Asperger's syndrome her superpower, as it allows her to fight for what she knows is right without worrying about her critics. Today, Greta continues to stand up for the environment and is seen as a symbol of hope for a cleaner and greener. This is a story of a girl named Jane Goodall. She is an inspiring figure with a lifelong love of animals. As you can see at the front cover of this book, there is Jane Goodall and a monkey right behind her back. Well, let's get right into it and learn more about her. Little People, Big Dreams, Jane Goodall. Written by Maria Isabel Sanchez Vergara, illustrated by Beatrice Shiroshi. Do you love animals too? And what is your favorite animal? Do you have a pet? And do you take good care of it? Maybe just like Jane Goodall. Little People, Big Dreams, Jane Goodall. Written by Maria Isabel Sanchez Vergara, illustrated by Beatrice Shirashi. When Jane was a little girl, her father gave her a stuffed chimpanzee called Jubilee. She carried him wherever she went. Jane loved animals very much. She wanted to live in the jungle with wild chimpanzees, just like the heroes of her bedtime stories, Tarzan and Jane. At night, her mother read her their adventures. But Jane could not afford to go to university to study animals, so she would have to study them in her own way. She saved every penny she had until she could buy a boat ticket to Kenya in Africa. That is her on the ship, traveling all the way to Africa. When she arrived, Jane met a well-known scientist called Louis Leakey. He was looking for a chimpanzee researcher willing to study them in the wild. He thought that they could learn about humans by studying apes. It was the opportunity Jane had been waiting for. So, Jane took another journey to the shores of Gombe in Tanzania. To start with, she couldn't see any chimpanzees, but she had the feeling that they were near, watching her. You see the chimpanzees at the back? She decided to sit quietly in the same spot, day after day. Finally, a small group of chimpanzees appeared and let her sit with them. Jane had been accepted into the family. Instead of numbering them, as all the other scientists did, Jane decided to give every chimpanzee a name. There was David, Greybeard, Flo, Flint, Fifi, and Kiki, to name a few. By watching them carefully, she noticed that some chimps were kind, quiet, and generous, whilst others were bullies. It seemed that humans and chimps were not so different after all. Then, Jane made another incredible discovery. Chimpanzees could make their own tools. This was something only humans were thought to do. Jane's talent was quickly recognized by Cambridge University. Here, she studied for her doctorate in animal behavior, and it wasn't long before she wrote her first article for one of the most famous science magazines. Jane continued to study chimps. in the Gombe for 40 years, but jungles were starting to disappear across Africa, which put all animals in danger. She knew she had to do something. Jane joined countless projects to protect nature. She was no longer just a courageous researcher, but also the most determined wildlife defender the world has ever seen. And the little girl who loved animals challenges us to be kind to nature, because if chimpanzees can live in harmony with the environment, we can too. Let's go through the history line of Jane Goodall. She was born in 1934 until now. This is a picture of her when she was little in 1935 with a chimpanzee doll. And another picture of her, young Jane, 1940. And as you can see, that looks like her with the binoculars out in the wild in 1965. And that is a picture of Jane Goodall with the chimpanzee, 1995. Jane Goodall was born in London, England. When she was 1, her father gave her a cuddly toy chimpanzee called Jubilee. Some people thought it would scare her, but she loved it. And it fostered her early love of animals. From a young age, Jane dreamt of living in Africa, where she could watch and write about animals. Jane's mother encouraged her dream and told her she must never give up. But when Jane left school, she couldn't afford to go to university to follow her dream. So, she worked hard to save enough money, and in 1957, she traveled to Kenya in Africa. There, she met a very important scientist called Dr. Louise Leakey, who was so impressed with Jane that he hired her as his assistant. Jane traveled to the Gombe Stream Chimpanzee Reserve in Tanzania to study chimps in the wild. At first, it was hard to get close enough to study them, but Jane waited patiently every day, giving them their space. Soon, they accepted her. By watching them closely, Jane made many groundbreaking discoveries. Most importantly, she saw chimps making and using tools. This was something only humans were thought to do. Jane showed that there isn't a sharp divide between humans and primates. After all, later, Jane studied for her doctorate and became a world-leading expert on chimpanzees. Now, Jane dedicates her life to conservation and education, spreading the message that we can all make a difference in the future, to the future of our planet. Isn't that such an inspiring story? And that it's possible for us to protect the nature too, just like the chimpanzees. To be part of the nature and to care for the nature.